Addiction never affects just the addict. It affects all of us. Recovering from addiction and alcoholism is also a life-changing battle for families dealing with a loved one's addiction. Numerous programs support addicts as they reclaim their lives, while their families face their own challenges without the same guidance. You're listening to Voices in Courage with KL Wells, where we transform the lives of the families and loved ones of addicts and alcoholics from surviving to thriving in the midst of chaos. Tune in as we highlight vulnerable stories of families who have addicted relatives and friends and learn how they have dealt with the challenges of isolation, desperation, and shame. If you are seeking ways to live your best life, then we welcome you into this safe space. Be a part of change today with your host, KL Wells.
Hi, I'm KL Wells here today on the Voices in Courage podcast, and I am super excited to have one of my dear friends, Sparkle, on the podcast with me. And Sparkle and I met almost 5 years ago, doing a Vision Quest process of 9 months together, and immediately loved her and her energy and who she is in the world. And we've both been on these amazing journeys since then. That certainly was wow. The Vision Quest piece was catalytic in our journeys. And so we continue to kind of do the weave in and out with each other, and both up to big work in the world. So I wanted to have Sparkle on today because in the early stages of my dealing with my son's addiction, Sparkle happened to mention that she had had her own addiction issue way back when. And I asked, would she be open to having a conversation with me so that I could better understand the psychology and the journey from an addict's perspective and figure out how could I show up as a mom differently than the traditional way of he needs to be fixed and I need to do everything I need to do, possible to make that happen. Was there a different side to that story? And we had a powerful conversation, just actually 20-minute powerful conversation before we launched off into our Vision Quest that day. And it changed the trajectory of my experience and therefore my son's experience and our relationship. So I wanted to have Sparkle on today to give some of our listeners an opportunity to better understand what is actually happening with somebody that you love dearly when they're in the throes of their addiction. So I'm going to turn over to you, Sparkle, and I'd kind of like you to start, kind of from the beginning origin story of, what happened when you were growing up and what kind of led you on this path and an inside window into your path, and then coming out the other side, if you would.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you today, and such love for you and our interwovenness.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a blessing. So yeah, well, first I'll just mention next month, April marks 30 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Since, I quit meth.
Wow.
And 30 years since I moved up to the Pacific Northwest. So that's an interesting marker that I was, just in the past week, I had that realization, like, oh, it's been 30 years. My goodness.
Wow.
So yeah, casting back, I grew up in Reno, the biggest little city in the world. And I found it to be a terrible place for people who are different in any kind of way. It's interesting because Reno has this reputation as a place of license, of, permission, with, gambling and prostitution and drinking. And like, it's one of those, sort of that Western, you do whatever you need to do. But because of that, there's also a very strong streak of social conservatism there. So everything's fine as long as you're fit within this narrow pathway of identity. So, growing up and coming out and figuring myself out, in the middle of that was fairly destructive, because there wasn't support, there wasn't examples. I remember when I was 13, Reno kicked the gay rodeo out. So for a long time, the gay rodeo was this annual event that happened in my town. And then suddenly it was like, no, you people can't be here anymore.
Yeah.
Which sends a message to little budding queer me that I'm not allowed or acceptable. That was the beginnings of those kinds of messages that I then internalized. Parallel to that, then, coming out in the mid 80s when I was a teenager, into the HIV epidemic, and the rampant homophobia that was present at that time related to that. All of the messages around, well, y'all just deserve it. You deserve to die.
Yeah.
All of those things. Then I internalized those in big ways. So all of that meant what's there to do? And Reno, there's really not much to do if you're not of age, not 21, not much to do but experiment, party, right? So I found my way to meth and started that when I was about 16. Was on meth until I left when I was 22, so about 6 years. I started university, stopped university in that time, in those 6 years. When I graduated high school, I graduated towards the top of my class. I was given a full ride scholarship to the University of Nevada. I postponed it for a year because I was like, I don't want to go, but I should. And, there was like, well, the message from my parents was like, well, you've got this free education, you should take it. It's like, yeah, all right, I'll take it later. Waited a year, went for 2 years and was like uninterested. My grades were dropping. It wasn't working for me. It was a large standard issue university that, didn't really tap into how I think about the world or the ways I wanted to be. And so it didn't have meaning for me. And seeing my grades just tank, I was just like, I'm out, this is pointless. Even though it's free, it's still pointless. Like it's not going to serve anybody, particularly me, well, if I try and keep going on this. And then, so then about a year later, I came to this point where I was like, wait a minute. These people that I'm hanging out with, using with, who are 10 years older than me, are not experiencing life in the way that I may want to experience life when I'm 10 years older than me, right? Like, they're a mess. And so I saw that example of like, okay, well, that's where I'm headed if I keep using, and I don't want to go there. So part of my brain was like cognizant enough to be aware of what was going on, and sort of like meta view, like, hey, Sparkle, is that really what you want to do? No, it's not. So then I was like, well, what am I going to do with that little tidbit? Because oh wait, let me use some more meth and then think about it later. But what I ended up deciding to do was a geographic intervention on myself. Basically pluck myself out of that environment, move to a new place, start fresh, place I didn't know where to get. I mean, ironically, I moved to Seattle, which at that time in the early 90s was also like a hotbed of meth use, but I didn't know that.
Right.
Luckily, I didn't sort of land in the middle of it. I did land in the middle of it, but not right. I didn't have the connection. No, so it still worked, thankfully. And I think I had maybe one relapse, but pretty much that was it, because I was like, I'm done. And I recognize my story is unique in that I didn't do a 12-step program. I didn't, access any kind of other treatment options. I didn't go to rehab. It was me making a decision, like, that's not what I want, not where I want to go. I'm going to make a change that's going to have an impact. And it did. And I look back on that still from the vantage point of 30 years later, recognizing that decision saved my life.
Right.
Getting out of that environment that I was in, coming to a place where I could start fresh and just be and explore who I was, just gave me the opportunity to flourish and sort of figure myself out in a new way. And so I'm alive because I left Reno,
right,
left that environment, that sort of thing. So I'm extremely grateful to my 22-year-old self for figuring that out.
Yeah, for 22, number one, that's super insightful, and then super courageous.
It's funny because I hear some of my friends from back then talk about, you were so brave and you were so courageous, and we all looked up to you as sort of living your identity without a care in the world, like you were going to be who you were. And I was like, oh my God, I was so scared. I didn't know what was happening. I was just trying to figure it out and try and make my way through. So it wasn't, I guess it was courage, but I didn't see it as courage. I viewed it as survival.
Right.
Courage. Looking back, I'm like, yeah, okay, there's some parallels and similarities. It's funny because I never really think of myself as courageous. I think of myself as like, I make decisions to survive. Right. Yeah. But that's a thread, because several times in my life I've made these kinds of decisions where I'm like, this isn't working. I need to do something different, and I'm going to do it no matter what the perceived cost is, or no matter what the messages around me are about doing it or not doing it, because there's lots of pressure to just stay the course. Yep. Do what you're going to do. And to me, that's like, yeah, I could do that. Sure. And then I'll die. That's the equation. I'll do that. And I die. And I'm not done. And that's been the thing every time. It's like, I'm not done. And so I can't just stay the course. I got to do in my own way that's going to be in alignment with my authenticity, with myself, so that I can actually exist in the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's almost these moments or pattern in your life where you've been brought to the edge, and it's I'm going to thrive or I'm going to die kind of place to question, and I choose life. And so that edge dwelling is a really powerful place to be. And I think we all kind of, those of us that are edge dwellers, may talk about it a little differently. But it is that I'm standing at this edge and I know what the consequences are if I stay here. And so I'm going to jump off the edge, and I don't know how that's going to go. It is an unknown edge. And I'm still doing it anyway.
Because the known answer is no real answer, really. Right. So the unknown, yeah, it could have that same answer, or it could lead to something different and greater and more in tune with who I'm supposed to be in the world. So, right. I've described it not as edge dwelling, but as living in between.
Oh, okay. So say more about that.
So I view myself as a betweener. Like, I have always been in liminal space, like whether it's in between groups of people. When I was a kid and in high school, I was never part of one single group. I was part of many different groups. So I was always sort of in between. And that sort of theme has been present the rest of my life, where almost everywhere I exist is sort of in this between place which gives a different perspective, because I have access to like this group and how it views the world, and this group and how it views the world, and this group and how it views the world. And I'm sort of here as a connector, as a bridge, as an in-between. And that perspective is fairly unique, but also very, very helpful, I think, for people. It can be hard for the person living in it because there's not a lot of support, as it were. You know, like one of the benefits of being in a group is you've got group dynamic, you've got social norms, you've got the sort of container of that in between or edge. There isn't really a container. And so you're just sort of like floating along.
Right.
Like, okay, where am I at today? Like what's going on and who am I interacting with? But it also gives us the ability to jump in wherever and sort of connect and be present in a different.
Yeah. Okay. I like it. So I'm thinking about this a little bit. Is your ability to kind of, well, this is how I'm framing it in my own head, is when we did the Vision Quest process, your ability to kind of step into my arena relative to my journey with my son and come over here and give me insights that I didn't have about the addict's journey was kind of that connector part. Yeah. So share a little bit with our audience in terms of what you shared with me that day that was so powerful and so illuminating and really stuck with me in terms of who I was going to show up as moving forward.
Let me tell you first, like one of the consequences of using meth when I was a teenager is that I rewired my brain. And so memory is not my strong suit. So my approach to this is, what do I imagine I would have said at that point? And you can correct me or
yeah, okay.
Which is, it's also an interesting space where you're having to deal with the long-term consequences of rewiring an adolescent brain.
Yeah.
You know, for a long time, for many years, I was just like, oh, I'm broken, or this is, and then I was like, oh no, this is a consequence, and that's all right. It is what it is. And so learn your coping methods, learn the strategies to deal with it and that sort of thing. And so I've been doing that for a long time, but it took a while to get to that point of acceptance of like, oh yeah, I did that. Okay. Done. Anyway, so what I imagine is that talking about coming from a place of compassion and unconditional love, that what the person needs is not corrective behavior or corrective language, but acceptance and love. And as hard as that is, like disconnecting from the emotional impact of their behavior on you, because that's the drug talking. It's not the person. Right. And so being in a space of like, I am going to still love you. I'm not going to be a pushover, and I'm going to have boundaries, and I'm going to, be self-protective, but I'm not going to allow that to become something that gets in the way of my loving you. Right. That what that need is like, no matter what, you are still loved. I still love you. Right. I think, the boundaries are really key and important.
Yeah.
Of course. Because that behavior, that chaos is hard to deal with, obviously. And so, I hate calling it tough, because that is a whole different area. But it's like, how do you, compassionate, unconditional love while holding boundaries and protecting others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do think that it is a higher level skill set in loving somebody deeply. The ability to recognize, as you said, is that when your loved one is using, they are a different person. And I framed Sam as, okay, well, that's his addict talking. That's actually not Sam talking. Because I know when Sam is clean and sober, I know who he is. So I knew the heart of who he was. And that distinction was immensely valuable for me. And I knew, because I knew who the heart of who he was, I knew when he was using and doing things that he would never have done in his clean and sober life, that there was going to be a lot of shame and judgment and guilt that he was piling on himself, and that was self-destructive in and of itself. And that my job was not to pile it on, because he already knew it, to the quantum field, what that was. And that's not enough to get to that edge of, I'm going to make a decision to choose life versus the drug. And, and so getting clear about that was a pivotal experience for me. And just recently, I was going back through a lot of my photos with him over the last 5 years, and more than half of them are with me, arm around him, smiling broadly, and he's high. And so, and I was consistent in delivering that message all along the way, that no matter what, you were always loved and will be always loved. And so to drop that judgment as a parent, and then also to understand it's not our job to fix them. So if you would say a little bit more about that component to it, because I think a lot of people get caught up in this notion that, number one, the consequences could be deadly, and coming to grips with that at the same time that you're dealing with an adult who's using is a really tricky kind of navigation.
It is indeed. First, I want to say, the connection is about a heart connection, heart to heart. You knew who he was. That doesn't change even beneath the drug use and the habits and the addict behavior. Like, that core is still there. And so letting your heart recognize that heart, and that level of connection is key in that. The piece about fixing people, we can't. I mean, full stop. We can't fix anybody else. We just can't. The person has to make their own choices and do their own thing. And it's hard to watch what appears to be very self-destructive behavior when your heart is saying, I love you, and I don't want to see you in that position. Right next to that is the piece of, like, it's my fault as a parent or a lover or a partner that this person is experiencing this, and you got to get rid of that. I think you can't get to the point of dropping judgment or not fixing if you don't actually deal with that part first or at the same time, because that is a major emotional weight, anchor, whatever it is that, the brick stone block that you tie to your ankles that sinks you, right? That piece is just not, it's not yours. It wasn't your decision. It wasn't your anything you did, I think, when I think about some of the conversations I've had with my mother since then, of really being like, no, this wasn't your fault. It wasn't you. You didn't force me to use meth. Right. There was a whole set of circumstances, a whole context that went into what made me start. And so you can't own my addiction. Right? Like, don't even try. It doesn't, it's not work. So if you own my addiction, then how are you going to get to the spot of I'm not going to judge you, and I'm going to not try and fix you. Right. So you have to let go of ownership of somebody else's addiction first, and recognize that they own it. And, letting go of that judgment piece, you're right. Like, the shame is there, and that just feeds continuing addiction. right? Because part of the process of stopping or coming off of it is then you have to deal with whatever's there that you haven't been dealing with because you're numbing it or covering it or all of that with drugs or the alcohol or whatever, whatever the addiction is. And so having that internal judgment that just sort of feeds, like that's somebody's own work to do too. Of like, how do I get past my own internalized judgment and shame to a point where I can walk in the world in a different way. Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah. And so I'm compelled to kind of ask the question, although I know it's a huge question, is, just from like a CNN version, if possible, can you speak to your own journey of letting go of your own shame and judgment?
Yeah. I can tell you it's 30 years later and I'm still not done. What I've been realizing lately is childhood, teenhood trauma writes itself in our body and gets stored there. And so while there's this sort of mental processes that we go through, that's just one level. And so I've been doing a lot of work in the last several years somatically to sort of unearth and release a lot of that. I think part of it's the recognition, like, where does this stuff come from? And when I sort of think back, like, okay, what was the context of me as a little queer kid in the early and mid 80s? No wonder I was messy, because that was a fucked up time. Sorry for that. There was lots of things going on in the world that really gave me this message that I don't belong and I don't deserve to be here and I don't deserve to be alive.
Right.
And so that all got plugged in into the brain, wired into the brain through the meth used, into the body. And then I think about, I'm going to turn 52 on Sunday. I never thought I would live past 50.
Even more recently?
I would say probably up until my 40s. I never thought I would make it. And so just the fact of making it is testament, right, in itself of something. I'm not sure, but it's testament, like that. If I believe that I wasn't going to make it past 50, and I have, then what else was not right, not correct, not an accurate assessment? And so some of it is just, I'm kind of ornery and stubborn. And like, okay, if you don't think I belong, well, I'm going to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
You, the mythical, whoever that you is, I'm gonna just keep going and prove a point. Like, that's BS that I don't belong. So that's part of it. I think shame is such a messy thing, and it just sinks in and has these little tendrils that just grab on, and so it comes up in weird ways, attaches to weird things. It thrives on silence and secrecy, and so not talking about these kinds of things keeps it in, so you got to have somebody to talk to. You got to have somebody who will unconditionally love you, right, to talk about this stuff, not a parent, like there's some things that I'm just like, I can't actually have that conversation with my mom. And that's fine. Like that doesn't mean anything about our relationship. It just means like, I know she doesn't want to know things. And I just don't, I don't necessarily want her to see the those messy, gritty depths of shame.
Mm-hmm.
I just, that would not do right for her,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so you gotta have somebody to just bear it all and just be like, here's the depths.
Yeah.
Who will listen and not judge and just be supportive.
Mm-hmm.
So finding ways to get that stuff out,
Yeah.
out of the brain, out of the body, out of the soul, like just release it
Mm-hmm.
without attachment too. And you know, part of the thing too is we create these identities around our shame and judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And then letting them go means, wait, but then if my identity is wrapped up in that and wrapped up with shame, then if I let that go, then who am I?
Right.
You know, I heard in this training I did recently around trauma, you know, that so much of our identity is actually an adaptive survival response that's not actually us.
Mm-hmm.
We believe it is because
Mm-hmm.
it's been that way for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a survival mechanism, an adaptive survival mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
So, ooh, that's powerful. Like, okay, if you back that up and be like, okay, what got me to that survival mechanism? What was I adapting to, and why? Although I also don't believe that you necessarily have to go that far back to understand the reasons. I'm like, I also believe that if you recognize the pattern, you can undo the pattern.
Totally agree with you.
Right? Like, I don't necessarily, for some people, they need to go back and figure out, like, okay, where did this pattern begin? How did it start? And then rewire it. Other people don't need that. Other people can look at the pattern and be like, okay, here's the pattern. What I need to know is, when does the pattern come into play now? And stop the pattern in its tracks then and replace it. So there's different approaches. Both are great. Depends on what somebody needs.
I think the whole pattern recognition piece, and obviously the trauma work that's being done now that we're able to read about and study, you know, Dr. Gabor Mehta and other trauma researchers, and the whole brain science research is taking place in terms of rewiring neural pathways and understanding, you know, how our brains actually work. For me, it has given me great hope, not only in my own journey, but Sam's journey and all the people that I get to touch and work with in my work, because we are not static in who we have become. We are dynamic in who we can become. And that understanding for me was revelatory. And I do think that for most people, it's still a nuanced way of thinking about things and potentially kind of rewiring their lives and deciding from a much more choiceful place. Now that I understand this piece, who is the person that I really do want to lean into and become, which is an extraordinary question to be able to ask.
And sort of right next to that question, who is it that I want to become, is, who was I before all of this stuff got layered on? What have I lost that I want to reclaim and reconnect with? And that's another powerful piece.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, as you're talking about your journey, for the most part, it is the loved one's journey also. Is that we are inextricably linked because we love somebody who is in addiction mode. A lot of the time, we become addicted to the other pattern that coincides with that. We don't see it as an addiction, but when you're codependent, you are addicted to the disease as well. Right. And so to uncouple our own journey from an addictive pattern behavior is the same journey, really. And I had to come up against my own addiction in this, not just from an enabling perspective, but I remember distinctly this one day when Sam had, you know, sent a text for more money. And I realized in that moment, when I would hit, you know, the cash app and send him money, that was my hit. That was my heroin hit or my meth hit or whatever. And I would get like this release of, I'd be like, oh, okay. And when I realized that, I was like, damn.
Right.
And that brought me to my knee. That was one of the drop to the knees moments for me in my own recognition of my side of the equation in this addiction.
Right. Well, it's then, because your identity becomes wrapped up as mother of an addict.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that uncoupling of, okay, who am I separate from?
Mm-hmm.
What pieces of this are actually feeding the addiction on my side?
Mm-hmm.
And is that what I want or not?
Mm-hmm.
And who do I want to be in this? And how do I step back and release judgment for that person, but also the judgment for myself?
Exactly.
And the shame myself. Because every time you hit that thing on the Cash App, there was also the endorphin, serotonin rush, but also the shame, guilt rush.
Absolutely. And I wasn't telling my wife.
Mm-hmm.
So I was lying. So it was the same thing, just in a different package.
Yep.
And so owning that and making a very clear, distinctive decision to change that behavior for myself and to step away from my own addiction around that, and to clearly define and get clear in my brain, saying no is saying I love you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I rewired and reconnected my own message around that, and then committed to being authentic and honest in my own journey.
Right. Which is so necessary. And a piece of that too is that recognition. We talked earlier about the addict's addiction is not about you. Your stuff is not about them. But that's where some of that blaming, well, if you blame them for your own stuff, then that just sort of keeps the cycle going. And you have to step back and be like, okay, what is my part in this? What do I own?
Right.
What am I responsible for? And how do I reconnect with my own self and authenticity?
And that's such a powerful distinction, Sparkle. Can you say it again? Because I think for a lot of people, that one distinction, if that's all they get out of this conversation is somebody who loves somebody who's dealing with addiction, that will change your world.
Yeah, that principle of the addict's addiction is not about you, and your part in it and how you are codependent is not about them. It's just not, and so releasing them from responsibility and attachment to your stuff, releasing yourself from it, from the judgment and shame attached to it. So critical.
Yeah. And that whole notion, I've heard so many people say, well, if you would just stop, I'd be fine.
Yeah.
And that it's almost comical to me now, because we do have our own work to do in this, and they're showing up to allow us to do our work. That's part of the gift of this, is that Sam's addiction gave me the opportunity to do my work. And in a way that I'm not sure anything else could have. I think kids have a particularly powerful opportunity with parents that I think I needed him in order to do my work.
Yeah. I do want to say, it makes sense that people, that a common view is if the person stops, everything will be okay. Because that's sort of the common cultural narrative.
Yeah.
And so that's like step one, like that's that first level thinking of like, okay, yeah, they've got to stop. But that's not actually the solution. You have to recognize all these other layers. But I just want to acknowledge that it makes total sense why that is such a thing, that such a common view. Like, oh, if they just stop, if we just get them to rehab, if they stay sober for a year, 7 years, whatever. You know, I was just having a conversation with one of my clients who's 7 years sober, and you know, not at risk of relapsing, but I was like, well, if we think about recovery in developmental stages, you know, 7 years isn't really that long. You know, if you're in your late 30s, early 40s, how long did it take to build the addiction up? Right. And so it takes time to do it. And we were having a conversation about, I have this theory, and I don't know if this is true or not, but like 7 years is sort of the rebellious teenage years of recovery. You know, and she was like, oh, that makes sense. Because just like the conversation we were having, you know, she's like, I'm feeling like a rebellious teenager. Well, I was like, well, you are.
Yeah. Well, it's an evolution, as life is.
Right.
And so, you know, addiction or loving somebody with addiction and being addicted on the codependency side, it's a journey. And, you know, I personally have had it my entire life. Is my mom was addicted to prescription medications. My brother was a cocaine addict. I married an alcoholic. I have a son who's been dealing with addiction. And so my whole life has been dealing with me on the other side of it, and my own evolution in understanding my own journey.
Right. And none of those people, none of them was their addiction about you.
No.
Right.
Nope.
You're about you. Your stuff is about you. Your stuff isn't even about any of them either. You know, so coming to that recognition for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's super powerful to think about from that perspective. I'm kind of inclined to want to take this to a meta discussion a little bit, if you're okay with that.
I can roll with it.
Okay. So, and what I'm thinking about is, there was a book that I read back in the 90s called The Paradigm Conspiracy. And that book is predicated on two paradigms. One is power over and control of, which is generally the world that we live in, which is about the more money you have, the more power you have, the more prestige and all the things, then you win. As compared to contrast with a soul honoring world, which is a very different world to live in, and is exemplified by the Iroquois Confederacy that came out of the 1500s. And so that's how I think about this, is that where we are right now is kind of that 500-year delta. Things are falling apart, and addiction is at all-time highs, suicide, all-time highs, mental illness, all-time highs. And the way that I frame it is, these are all massive, big red flags that are basically signaling to us as humanity that this power over and control paradigm is not working. So I'm curious your perspective.
Yeah, I would agree with you. You know, I think if you take an even longer term view, you see the sort of big arcs and cycles, which, you know, pin that. Wanted to come back and just make the point that recovery processes, whether they're for the addict or the codependent person, are not linear. They're not like, whoop, here we go, we start and we get there.
Right.
You know, they do these funny jumps. So just recognizing that also gives some freedom and openness in the process where, you know, today things are great, tomorrow they may not be so great. The day after they may be a little better, a little worse, you know, but just acknowledging that. So then step back, the sort of broad arcs and cycles of humanity. I think we go through these periods where we learn that lesson and then we gradually forget, and then we learn it again, and then we gradually forget. You know, and so we're in that learning the lesson again phase. You know, we can hope that it'll last longer once we do learn a lesson.
We'll up level a little bit here.
Right. And maybe each time humanity goes through that, we up level a little bit. I don't know. But our souls know, and our souls are doing what they need to do. And my journey now is individually soul honoring myself, like where I'm supposed to be in the world and what I'm supposed to be doing, and supporting people in figuring that out for themselves too.
Right.
I think there's work that needs to be done, big picture, system level, and there's work that needs to be done at the like granular individual level. And I've spent lots of time working at systems level. And part of my process now is sort of letting go of the guilt of not doing that.
Oh,
makes sense.
Yeah.
That, we need people working at all levels, and if my place right now is to work at the granular, that's all right, because that is work that needs to be done.
Right.
And other people are working system level. I did lots of system level and wasn't really working granular, right? And so just being okay with that has been an interesting process in the last
Absolutely.
couple of years.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I never thought about it that way. And I work in the executive space. So the way that I think about it is granular in each individual that I get to work with. At the same time, my hope is that there are bigger ramifications because they run companies.
Sure. Well, I any change on an individual level in the direction of authenticity and soul honoring has an impact on the whole,
on the macro.
On the macro. And so even for somebody not in a leadership position, the more people we have who are honoring themselves and living to their authenticity, the better off everything is. And so but then also you have leaders who are doing that and serving as models. That has the ripple effect too. But somebody still needs to work with those people. So it's we need people at every level.
Yep.
This work.
Yep. Exactly. Okay, so coming back down to earth a little bit in the individual level.
Yeah.
What would be your most powerful, pivotal advice to those, whether they're spouses or sisters or friends or even parents, of people that are loving someone who's in the throes of addiction?
I want to say it's the most simplest advice ever, which is keep loving. And I recognize that is the most complex advice ever. Also, so it's both simple and complex, but at the root of it is still loving. And every action, think about what is the love response to this? What is the love ethic? What would love do in this instance? And coming, I think that requires a level of honesty with oneself. That is important. It requires authenticity. It requires understanding, following your intuition, like all of those things. But fundamentally, keep loving.
Yeah. And so I'm with you. And what I think about is that also translated in my world as loving myself.
Oh yeah, totally.
And for a lot of people, that's a big lift also.
Yeah. Cause we're all dealing with our own stuff, our own, guilt and shame, our own packages, as it were. So, the more you can love yourself, the easier it is to love somebody else. So, all of this, I think, starts with ourselves.
With ourselves, yeah.
Practice letting go of that judgment and shame on yourself. understand your own areas of responsibility and what you own and don't own, and hold yourself with the same love that you hold somebody else, because we seem to have easier time loving somebody else than loving but we need to love ourselves too, and almost first. I don't know about that, but
well, I'm a big believer in that we need to model what loving ourselves looks like, and stepping into that space. And it became clear to me that I did not want to stay in the crisis of all of this, that I have a big life that I love. And so I wanted to figure out how to thrive in the midst of the chaos of dealing with Sam's disease. And so setting my sights on that thriving piece changed the trajectory completely. And just the notion of thinking I could thrive while my son is in the throes of an addiction, to some people is crazy talk. And I'm okay with that. That was my intention. And so to kind of wrap this part of our conversation up, because I think we should do a part 2, is to ask you, what are 3 things that you do for yourself in terms of your own thriving?
I would say number 1 is honoring where I'm at in the moment. It's that checking in with yourself to say, okay, what's going on for me right now, today? How am I feeling? Physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, psychically, all of that, and accepting it. That's it has to start there, because if I wake up and I'm angry and I'm like, well, I can't be angry, well, then that doesn't actually help me get through it. Recognizing like, oh, I'm angry, and that's okay. That is a feeling, an emotion. It is what it is. If I wake up and I'm uber happy and think, oh, I can't be happy, same thing, right? So like, okay, I'm going to be happy today. Great. Tomorrow I may not be, but that's tomorrow. Right now I'm happy with that. So I think that piece of like just understanding and accepting where you are, where I am, is one practice that I've done a lot of. Number 2 is learning to trust my gut and intuition more. We believe that the brain is the seat of knowledge, and that's not actually entirely true. That's one type of knowledge. We have multiple ways of knowing. And so tuning into those and understanding those is another piece of this, and listening and acting on that knowledge, right? Not just being, oh yeah, my gut says this, but I'm going to ignore it. Like letting intuition guide us, I think, is number 2. Number 3, what would I say for number 3? I'm going to do a 2-part number 3.
Okay.
So I can cheat. Part A is, it's okay to have a team of support.
Awesome.
Right? Like,
yes.
We need a therapist and a body worker and a music teacher and an art teacher and a friend and a coach and like whatever it is, it works for you. But having that team, like I think if everybody had a team, we would be in a lot better place.
Totally agree.
But there's no way that one person can help one person completely, right? We each have a part to play. So that's 3, but 3.1 or 3.A is part of that team really should be a body worker, somebody who's doing some body work with you. So I've been seeing my massage person, this one I've been doing it a long time, but this one in particular, probably 3 years, maybe 4. He's a pretty woo-woo energy worker also. And so we're very compatible in that way. So it's not just massage therapy.
Yeah.
We call him the mechanic, which is great. He loves it. But I think like working that stuff out of the body is critically, so that has helped me. So those are my 4 things wrapped up as 3.
Great. Well, I love all 4. So we'll go with 4, and that's fantastic. Yeah. And I think all 4 of those are mission critical for us to be the best versions of ourselves, to really elevate in terms of how we show up in the world, and continue the journey of unfolding who we really, 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 truly are, from that genuine, authentic, transparent place, without fear, but I still think fear shows up. It's just we still walk through it.
Yep.
So
can't get rid of fear. Can't get rid of fear.
No, it's just really, what do we do with it?
Yeah.
And do we let it stop us, or do we let it sidetrack us, or do we just go, oh, thanks for the message, and move forward? So, so as we wrap this up, any other thoughts that you have? And then I'm going to ask you, how do people get a hold of you, and what are you up to, like, right now?
No, I don't think I have any other thoughts. I mean, I have lots of other thoughts, but none top of mind for this.
Okay.
Part 2 would be great if we got the opportunity to do a part 2.
Super.
What am I up to these days? So I have my own coaching practice, Liminal Mirror. Liminal because of the in-between space that I inhabit, because so much of my work is really mirroring back to people. It's not, I don't have the solution for anybody. We all sort of carry the seeds of our own healing, and my job as coach and energy healer is to just reflect that back. So that was the reason for the name. But coaching, energy work, energy healing, and various classes at times. So I'm doing a class coming up that I call Secrets to Navigating Change, which really is, change, big or small, does a number on us, makes us question all sorts of things. It causes all sorts of stress. And there's some pretty, I want to say easy, but some things we can do that will help us navigate that. So that's one of the ways that I can help support people. I have another one on managing anxiety and overwhelm. I'm working on,
which is a great topic right now.
Big need.
Huge.
Another one that I'm working on is how to just stay grounded and centered. So soon. One of the big things that I'm working on is a self-guided radical self-love workbook, like how to actually begin to love oneself. What does that actually mean, and what does it look like? So that's the work that really interests me, is like radical self, how to love oneself in one's entirety, in one's full complexity and authenticity. And that's the work I love supporting people with, is coming to that place of understanding, like, who are they, how to support themselves in that, how to love themselves in that kind of. So
awesome.
Website is out there. It has contact information. I think that'll be in the show notes.
It will.
Folks, happy to have folks reach out.
Absolutely. Yes. So you are such a gift. And I will be there with you on March 28th. I'm super excited about this because I've watched, from afar, the journey unfold, and now I'm going to actually, participate with you, which will be super fun. And what a blessing you are, what a blessing you have been to me personally, and to so many people that you are now working with on an individual level. Sometimes I mean, I just think we are so blessed in this moment. And we are so blessed to have you in the place that you are in, and you taking that step of calling to do this work right now that is so needed by so many people. And so I thank you, and I thank you for, taking the calling, and I thank you immensely for this conversation, and who you've been for me on this journey, and now for so many others on this journey. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Love you.
Love you too.
Thank you for joining us in this episode. We hope this discussion gives you the empowerment you need during these challenging times. Remember, there is always light after darkness. For more inspiring conversations like this one, subscribe to the show at voicesencouraged.com/podcast. We encourage you to share with your friends and family going through similar situations, so we can continue to build a strong community of hope and possibility. Start your life-changing journey today. Join our community at voicesencouraged.com.